Buongiorno, anzi buon pomeriggio e benvenuti. I contributi filmati che vedrete provengono dal convegno Arnoldo Mondadori e il futuro dell'editoria, che è stato organizzato qualche tempo fa dalla Fondazione Mondadori e dalla casa editrice Mondadori. Editoria del futuro. Ci siamo chiesti cosa sta cambiando nel mondo dell'editoria e che cosa cambierà. Abbiamo voluto chiamare questo convegno l'editoria del futuro perché siamo convinti che il ruolo dell'editore, e cioè di mediatore tra un mondo della creatività, un mondo di autori e il mondo dei lettori, sia fondamentale oggi come lo sarà in futuro, viste le valanghe di contenuti e informazioni molto spesso indifferenziate che tutti i giorni ci bombardano. Cosa sta cambiando dunque nell'editoria e cosa cambierà? Fino a qualche anno fa molti davano il libro per morto, assediato da nuovi predatori come ebook, social e podcast. I nuovi media tolgono o danno nuovo spazio al libro? Quali interazioni sono in atto tra l'editoria di libri e le grandi organizzazioni mediatiche di diffusione di contenuti, audiolibri o serie televisive, sia in termini di produzioni sia in termini di prodotto? Quali sono le prospettive della distribuzione e delle librerie indipendenti e di catena? Quali i rapporti odierni e futuri con la vendita online? È ancora possibile oggi parlare di progettazione editoriale avendo solo il libro come oggetto di riferimento? Il libro ha un futuro? Queste sono alcune delle domande che abbiamo posto ai nostri ospiti, le cui riflessioni vi accingete ad ascoltare. Il primo è James Daunt. James Daunt è amministratore delegato di Barnes & Nobles, una delle più grandi catene di librerie al mondo. È stato un libraio indipendente, fondatore della Daunt Book ed è noto per essere stato il risanatore della grande catena di librerie Waterstone in Inghilterra. Morgan Entrekin, presidente di Grove Atlantic, la Grove Press è la casa editrice indipendente americana, fondata nel 1959 da Barney Rossett, mitica figura dell'editoria americana, nota per aver portato in America la grande letteratura contemporanea, soprattutto francese. Nel 2015 Morgan lancia il sito LitHub, sito e piattaforma che raccoglie il meglio delle informazioni su cultura editoriale, libri da tutto il mondo. Helena Gustafsson, responsabile dei contenuti di Storytel. Storytel è, con Audible, il leader mondiale delle piattaforme in streaming di audiolibri e podcast. È nata in Svezia nel 2005 ed è arrivata in Italia nel 2018. Nel gennaio 2021 Audible ha superato il 1,5 milioni di abbonati in tutto il mondo, a cui offre 120.000 tra podcast e audiolibri. Nuria Cabutí, amministratore della Gatola Pending Random House spagnola, è la responsabile di un grande gruppo editoriale. Dopo aver ascoltato un editore indipendente come Morgan Entrekin, è interessante sapere qual è il futuro dell'editoria dal punto di vista di un grande gruppo editoriale. Nuria ce lo dirà. Chiudiamo con un ospite importante ed un amico di Book City, David Grossman, che ha già partecipato a diverse edizioni della nostra manifestazione e che ci parlerà del futuro del libro. Non mi resta che augurare a tutti un buon ascolto.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm hugely honored, and particularly because I have a very personal connection to Mondadori. Roberta Mondadori and Nick Perrin, Roberta Perrin, were instrumental in my career, supporting me and advising me when I moved from my very small independent bookstore and took over the running of Waterstones, the largest only chain of bookstores in the United Kingdom, back in 2011. So thank you to them, and thank you for the honor of inviting me to your conference. I'm asked about the market in the United Kingdom and the United States now that we emerge or begin to emerge from the COVID pandemic. At the start, it was a really uncertain period for booksellers. Our stores were closed, and I feel that we were really at a point of great danger. The actual experience has been obviously different depending on how long our stores were closed. In the United Kingdom for 8 months, very difficult. In the United States, very short period, only as much as 3 months in some states, otherwise open, much easier. But what we found beyond that is really strong growth of reading, strong engagement with books, and now that we have our bookstores open, very strong sales. In the United Kingdom, we are about 3% elevated from 2019, from pre-pandemic. In the United States, it's more like 11% from pre-pandemic. So very strong growth in book sales, and the bookstores are doing well within that. Now that we're open, our customers are back with us. The exception is in our city centres, where we rely on office workers and tourists. Central London, New York City, Boston, San Francisco, these places are still very depressed. But overall, and I'm sure it's true and know it's true for independent booksellers also, the book trade is doing very well. But it's not across all categories. Some things are doing much better. We're finding young adults are reading particularly. TikTok is causing massive bestsellers of established books, old books, that suddenly sweep forward. At Barnes & Noble, at Waterstones, 5 of our top 10 books will come from a social media promotion, mainly from TikTok. We've also seen growth in some categories, manga. In both countries, 500, 600% from pre-pandemic. In the United States, at Barnes & Noble, 3% of our growth alone comes from manga. It's an astonishing impact. Children's books are a little less strong. They haven't really changed at all from pre-pandemic. And we can see one of the factors is that we are having less people in our stores, but when they come in, they're buying much more. So less footfall, but much higher average spending. And I think that impacts our children's departments a little, where you expected people to come in all the time and buy a little bit all the time. So some trends there that are interesting for us. Clearly also when we were closed, our internet operations were very strong. Online at Waterstones substituted nearly 40% of our book sales. So a considerable growth. Now that we're reopened, and this is true in the United States as well, online sales remain very elevated. So customers have stuck with us. We are therefore emerging from this pandemic in both countries with bookstores busy, sales above where they were before the pandemic, very little closure amongst independents, and the big chains, of which obviously I run 2, emerging with strong balance sheets and really good sales. Very optimistic. But we're in a very competitive world in which Amazon still exists and in which we continue to have to concentrate and invest in the things that make physical bookshops, real bookshops, so compelling. I think those are the same as they were before the pandemic. We have to work on what we look like, on our furniture, on our presentations, our carpets, our lighting. Bookstores are physical spaces, they're social spaces, and they need investment. We need the right books in them, and the essence of being a good bookseller is how you curate. Nothing has changed in that respect. But the pandemic again has shown us that you can't sit still. You need to change and react. And this explosion in reading amongst young people, which is so exciting, also needs us to change a little bit what's in our bookstores, give more space to manga, to graphic novels, to young adult in our cases. Third, of course, and I always think most importantly, our bookstores rely on our booksellers. And this pandemic has shown in my companies, the vocational commitment of our booksellers is extraordinary. When we reopened, our booksellers came back to work. They're on the front line. They're still engaging with customers, even behind their masks. Really professional, enthusiastic, skilled, and knowledgeable. So our investment in booksellers, in their pay, and in their skills remains the most important thing that we do. But we also need to think about the boring things. IT, have good systems in place. The stock control systems. Logistics. For independents, that will be what the publishers and wholesalers provide. For big bookstores, we need to invest in our logistics, in our customer service, in supporting both our online operations and the store experience. And we need to harness our ability to engage with social media, with TikTok, with Instagram, with all the other platforms, and online. Finally, I think the pandemic has shown that we need to think about what we sell alongside books. That the skill of a bookseller is not just how they sell books, but it's how they sell other things alongside books to complement the books. And in the pandemic, we had huge success with board games, jigsaw puzzles, educational toys for children. How a bookstore puts an assortment around books remains hugely crucial, I think, to the overall experience in the bookstore, but also to the financial success that that bookstore will have. We are, as I've said before, social spaces, inspirations, intellectual, visual, but also, frankly, places in which people like to come out with a bag full of nice things to take back with them. And that is not just books. And the pandemic taught us that again. My final note is again one of optimism. I feel that bookstores came through this pandemic in the United Kingdom and the United States remarkably well. They were supported by the publishing industry. They generally were supported by their landlords, and they were shown commitment and engagement by the booksellers who work for them. The stakeholders around our bookstores really took us through the pandemic, and we've now emerged into a world where our customers are reading more than they ever have done. They're buying more of those books in our bookstores, and the strengths of the bookstore, as I say, largely social ones, remain ever more apparent, and I think give us huge confidence that even in a world in which Amazon invests in drones to deliver things to you, even as you think of wanting them, we booksellers will probably stand more robustly against that than any other part of the retail world. Thank you for inviting me again, and I wish you all a very good end to the year and a happy Christmas when we come to it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Morgan Entrekin. I'm the publisher and CEO of Grove Atlantic in New York. We also have a small imprint in London. I am honored to be here today, participating in the celebration with the Mondadori Foundation, and glad that my friend Luca invited me. Mondadori is one of the great publishing houses of the last century and a half in Europe, and I think that, like many of the great European publishing families and publishing houses, they set a sort of standard and ideal for what was perhaps a platonic ideal of publishing. And an example that I've tried to use as I've built Grove Atlantic over the years. Grove Atlantic consists of two imprints: the Atlantic Monthly Press, that was founded in 1917 out of the great Atlantic magazine that goes back to the mid-19th century, publishers of Emerson and Thoreau, et cetera, and Grove Press. Grove Press was founded in 1947, but taken over by Barney Rossett in 1951, and became one of the great pioneering publishers in the United States and in the world in the 50s and 60s and 70s, taking chances in fighting the censorship law over such authors as D.H. Lawrence, Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, a very famous obscenity case that went to the Supreme Court in the U.S. So I was able to, with a group of investors, take over Atlantic in 1990 and merge it with Grove in 93. We're not a small press. We're a mid-sized house. We publish about 120 books a year. We have a catalog of about 3,000 titles. And that, of course, for those of you who are publishers know, as those of you who are publishers know, that's key in that literary backlist gives us a steady flow of revenue. But in terms of the publishing landscape in North America, as I've watched over the last 45 years, there has been tremendous consolidation. When I came into the business in the fall of 1977, there were probably 30 or 40 mid-sized publishers. Since then, they have been absorbed into what now are the big five, soon to become the big four after PRH and SNS merge. PRH currently is 150 times my size. After the merger, it'll be 200 times my size. So we do compete with them, but it's challenging. I think that the ways that what we can offer, and I think it offers a model for the future, is that we are sort of a boutique publisher. We're not small, but we can do a kind of hands-on publishing and an artisanal publishing that I think is somewhat challenging to do at those large corporations. There's great publishing that goes on at all five of those of the big companies, but it's a little bit different experience, I think, for the authors. What we're also able to do is that we're able to profile sort of smaller books or books that, you know, a book that we budget to sell 10,000 copies, but we hope may sell 25,000. It would be challenging for one of the big five to pour a huge amount of publishing capital into that book. And by publishing capital, I mean my personal involvement, my director of sales personal involvement, et cetera. And so I use the example of a book by Viet Thanh Nguyen, a brilliant young Vietnamese American writer. We acquired his first novel, The Sympathizer, after I think 10 publishers had turned it down. I was very excited about the book because it seemed to tell the story of the Vietnam War from the other point of view, the Vietnamese point of view. And I set up lunches and meetings with Viet around the country with booksellers. I took him out to Seattle to sit with the Amazon people. And this was for a book that had a first printing of 12,000 copies. And you know, another agent asking me about this said, well, couldn't one of the big five do that? And I said, sure they could, but I doubt they would do it for a book they were printing 12,000 copies of. The book went on to win the Pulitzer along with 10 other prizes and has now sold 800,000 copies. So that's been a very positive experience. But I think that's an example of our ability to sort of profile a smaller title. And I think, you know, looking at the future, and sort of the topic of this forum, I think that there's going to be the possibility, and I can see it already happening, of mid-sized, smaller, independent companies filling in the gaps where the big five aren't. And what I also see is serious nonfiction publishing. Increasingly over the last 45 years, a lot of more trade-oriented books have migrated to university presses, Yale University Press, Harvard University Press, University of California Press. They're doing work that Random House or some of the other imprints might have done in the 70s and 80s. One of the changes that's happened also that Luca asked me to speak a little bit about and to give you the landscape is the changes in distribution. And I think this all is unfolding, as the business matures. When I came in the 70s, independent bookstores, there were over 3,000. They were probably for general trade books, serious nonfiction, literary fiction, drama, poetry, literature, and translation, the kind of books that Grove Atlantic publishes. They represented probably 40% of the market. They're now down to about 15%, certain titles maybe 20%. In the 1980s, we saw the growth of the chain bookstores, Barnes & Noble, B. Dalton, Borders, Walden. And in the 1990s, we saw the big box retailers like Costco and Sam's and Walmart and Target start to enter and become vendors of books. And then in the 2000s, we saw Amazon. So all that has changed the landscape tremendously. I still think the bricks and mortar stores have a place. We've got a terrific new team at Barnes & Noble led by James Daunt, who I think you're also going to hear from today. And there's a essential thing that bricks and mortar stores can do that the online retailers can't, and that is aid in discovery, and they can curate. In that you can walk into a good bricks and mortar bookstore, and within 5 minutes, you can check out the table of new nonfiction, check out the table of translated fiction, check out the table of new books on history and biography. And you can do that online, but it's more challenging. And I think that's the role that bookstores, physical bookstores have. And they also serve as a sort of third place in your community, so that you're not just going to bars and restaurants. It's a place where people can gather. And I think that we've seen a slight resurgence in the independent sector over the last decade here, and we've seen Barnes & Noble stabilized and seems to be in the process of being turned around by James Daunt and his team. And so, I think online is always going to be there. There was an initiative called Bookshop to help independent booksellers launched in January of 20 that's been very successful. Particularly the timing was such that the lockdown came 6 weeks later, and it really offered a lifeline to many of the indie booksellers. So that has been an important development. And I think that the independent booksellers and bricks and mortars booksellers are going to have to up their game. But there's a place for them, and we need them, because we can't. I think it's what's happened in the flow of information in our society has become concentrated in too few hands. And we see that, I think, in some of the polarized political discourse and polarized discourse on many topics. And it simplifies the conversation, and diversity of distribution, diversity of information providers and content providers helps mitigate against that problem. So, and what I believe about what the distribution has done is, one thing is it somewhat leveled the playing field. It would have been much more challenging for a mid-sized publishing house like Grove Atlantic, competing against companies 100, 200 times its size, to compete 45 years ago. Because of the concentration of distribution, it is easier to get a book out into the world. And of course, because of electronic and ebooks and audiobook distribution. So, but again, the problem with that is everyone's now a publisher. And so we have somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million self-published books coming out every year. So again, more critical the role of the curators, and more challenging the process of discovery. What Luca also asked me to tell you a little bit about a platform that we launched called the Literary Hub. This was an idea that I had when I saw that there were so much literary content being produced by publishers, booksellers, authors, literary organizations like Mondadori Foundation, the equivalent in the United States, and but it was scattered across the internet, and it would have taken you hours to go find it. But that if we were able to create a neutral platform that brought it all together, it would serve everyone, and it would lift and make the discourse more accessible. So I went around and talked to my friend Sonny, my late friend Sonny Mehta at Knopf, to Jonathan Galassi at Farrar Straus, to the folks at New York Review of Books, to the folks at Norton, et cetera. I explained the idea and I said, would you join me? And would you contribute your content? And they all said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We launched in the spring of 2015 with about 70 partners. We now have more than 280 partners, every major imprint of all of the big five, every major university press, every major not-for-profit and literary organization in the country, literary journals, magazines, authors, independent booksellers, et cetera. And we have more than 5 million page views a month. We have a social media reach of almost 1 million, combining Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We post more than 350 pieces a month, and so it's been wildly successful. There's no cost to it. You don't have to pay to subscribe. It's supported by advertisers and sponsors. I think the key is that we were successful in first targeting the people who self-identify as readers, and that means, in my opinion, the people who read serious books, literature, serious nonfiction, et cetera. So it's been hugely exciting, and there's so much more that we plan to do there. We've launched verticals focused on crime fiction, now have 1.2 million page views a month on that. We do a professional review aggregator called Bookmarks, where we follow about 125 professional reviewers from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times to the Financial Times and the Guardian, all in the English language, et cetera. But we bring them together with ratings of rave, positive, mixed, or pan, sort of like a Rotten Tomatoes for books, but less snarky. And as a journalist asked, is this a response to the anonymous reviews on Amazon and Goodreads? And I said, it's not necessarily a response; it's a counterbalance. So you can go and see what anonymous reviewers and the public is saying about a book on Amazon or Goodreads, but you can see what the professional reviewers are saying. And that's been very successful, really used by librarians and booksellers. And so it's something that we hope will continue to grow. Our audience right now is 35 or 40% outside of North America. So it will continue to grow, we hope. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit of where I see the future of publishing. I think that there's going to be I think it's a very exciting time to be a young person working in publishing. I think there are going to be all sorts of opportunities in hybrid forms of self-publishing, of legacy publishing, of agents and publishers working together, of booksellers and authors working together, of just all sorts of ways for things to happen. And the role of the publisher has traditionally been to finance a book, or to pay a writer for the book, to edit and market, distribute, and publicize. And so I think those essential roles will always be there. And I think the key thing is that there's always going to be a place for books. And I think the most exciting thing that I see happening in the world right now, and it's been happening for a couple of decades in the United States, is that we are finally hearing from the non-dominant cultures. And those are both in America, the non-white culture, but also around the world, the non-Western culture. And I think it's hugely important because books can do something that no other medium can. They bring empathy to a reader when they experience something like Ralph Ellison or James Baldwin or Richard Wright's books 70 years ago. They understand the African-American experience perhaps a little bit better when they come away from Invisible Man or Native Son, or later the works of Toni Morrison. But also what fiction and what nonfiction can do is that it offers the deep dive into a topic in the way that Piketty's Capital does, or Lawrence Wright's great book about the origins of Al-Qaeda looming tower, or Yuval Harari's book, Homo Sapiens. Those books, they do something that no other medium, no documentary can do that, no magazine article, no post on a blog. So there's always going to be a place for those 100,000 word narratives, as I refer to them. And I think one of the also most encouraging things that I've seen in the last 25 years is that young people continue to turn to books. The explosion of Harry Potter around the world in the 1990s was an amazing thing to see. When people thought that the screens had finally moved all, the next generation away from print media, we saw children and adults all over the world being absorbed into those brilliant stories about Harry Potter and learning that what a fiction can do, that it can take you away to another world in a way that no other medium can. And so I'm very optimistic about the future of publishing, the future of books. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. So thanks.
Signore e signori. My name is Helena Gustafsson, and I'm the Chief Content Strategy Officer at Storytel. I'm truly honored to be invited to this occasion and thank the Mondadori Foundation for inviting me. Storytel's vision is to make the world a more empathetic and creative place through fantastic stories that can be shared and appreciated by anyone, anywhere, at any time. And I believe that despite our differences in history, age, and operations, Mondadori and Storytel share these values. For those of you that don't know Storytel, we are the Northern Europe's biggest subscription service for audiobooks and ebooks. We have been in the Italian market since 2018, and I'm happy to say that Mondadori has been a part of that journey from the beginning. As I have understood, your founder, Mr. Arnoldo Mondadori, had a profound interest in new types of storytelling. And one interesting example that I found when I Googled was the launch of Gialli Mondadori in 1929. Why is this interesting? Well, because Giallo, or the way to serialize crime and thriller stories, is one of the content segments that globally is the most popular in Storytel today. Serialized content doesn't just work on Netflix. Binge listening is also a phenomenon in Storytel. I have also been told that one of his first jobs touched upon the audio segment. As a reader of captions in silent films and cinemas, other things that you probably already know is that he was a great innovator. Always looking for new markets, new ways of doing business, new ways of distributing, communicating, and, as I already mentioned, ways of creating stories. Mr. Mondadori didn't either seem afraid of new media or other media formats, like radio, cinema, television. Medias that today are often seen as competitors to the book industry, since we all compete about people's time. On the contrary, Mr. Mondadori regarded them as allies in promoting culture, stories, and education. He was simply determined to create readers when there was no market. And in so many ways, what I've been told about Mr. Arnoldo Mondadori could be applied to Storytel's mission and the way we work. Storytelling has become a strong movement around the world, and we now see how the book once again has become relevant in our modern society with the help of audio, increasing the total value of the book industry and reaching people that might not have become readers otherwise. Storytel's strong belief in the unlimited subscription and digital easy access contributes to the growth of consumption of stories in all the 25 markets that we are present. 80% of our subscribers say they read more books since joining Storytel, and the same amount of subscribers also say that they read more often. The digitalization has democratized the book industry, giving more authors the possibility to reach an audience and earn more money. As much as 70% of the consumption in Storytel is now on backlist. Backlist, not frontlist. Mainly due to the curation and the recommendations that we do in our app. This has not only prolonged the lifetime of a book, but also broadened the type of books people find and read. This is not only affecting the audio format, of course. A recent survey of the Swedes' overall use of audio, ebooks, and printed books show that the development of the audiobook drives the consumption overall. In short, we use literature more and more often. But I'm not here to talk about figures. I'm here to talk about the love of stories and about how Storytel is a clear universal trend. The medium and formats might have changed throughout history and will definitely continue to change, but the stories will remain. Because stories are what brings us together, how we are connected, and how we learn about ourselves and other things. How we travel without traveling and escape from the ordinary every day. The simple fact is that we don't just want stories, we need them. And that is why we believe is the main reason for the global growth of the audiobook, and why Storytel's founder, Jonas Tillander, believed in the audiobook already back in 2005 when he launched Storytel in Sweden. A pioneer just like Arnoldo Mondadori, a bit ahead of his time, as pioneers often are. Jonas Tillander's idea of unlimited subscription service was actually 1 year ahead of another big innovation service. You might have heard of them. Their name is Spotify. Today, this innovation has generated record high revenues for publishers, something we clearly see in the Nordics. Audiobooks have created added value for everyone, for authors, publishers, and readers. And there is an obvious common interest in maximizing the return of the investments in audio. And that is the reason for why we at Storytel work so hard to build great relationships with the publishers we work with. We do this by generous data sharing, editorial collaboration, and continuous testing of new technology. Our goal is to stand out as the best partner in the audiobook industry. And based on this common ground, Italian Storytel is collaborating with Mondadori Editore, like the launch of the first audio version of the bestsellers, such as George Orwell's 1984, which was recently released, or the case of Agatha Christie, best titles produced by Storytel. Here in Italy, I would say that the audio growth journey has just begun. Our hope is that Mondadori and Storytel together will grow the Italian market step by step. And who knows, if Mr. Arnoldo Mondadori was born 100 years later, he might have been the one who launched and found a digital subscription platform with a global ambition to spread stories, just like Storytel. So let us continue to work together to spread stories that can be shared and enjoyed by anyone, anywhere, anytime. Grazie mille.
So it's a pleasure to participate in this event, as Mondadori has been closely connected to the Spanish language market for many years. Mondadori entered the Spanish and Latin American market in 1985 when it acquired Grijalbo. And later in 2001, Mondadori created a joint venture with the Bertelsmann Group, which lasted until 2012. So I still have very fond memories of my visits to Segrate, to this same impressive building where this event is being held. So let me send my warmest greetings to all of you. And I would like to explain you a little bit what Grupo Editorial is and what challenges we faced during the pandemic, and also how we envision the book industry future. But let me start by saying that our mission is to get people to develop a passion for reading by publishing books that really are of their interest. And we believe that books, they tell the ideas they convey, have the power to strengthen social dialogue and social cohesion, and they contribute to creating a better future for next generations. So our vocation is to reach 570 million Spanish speakers with a wide variety of proposals. So we have 15 prints that work as a small independent publishing houses, and we sell over 100,000 books per day. And we have like a catalog of 88,500 authors, and we publish around 1,800 new titles per year. So our idea is that we really reach all the Spanish audience. So we have offices in 9 countries. We also have an office in Miami where we target the US Spanish market. And we've also expanded in the Portuguese market by acquiring a company in Portugal recently. But the important thing is that our authors are the center of our strategy. And we support them from the very beginning through all their career. And the editor is the author's partner. So when we look at the effects of the pandemic in our markets, I must say that it has been very different from the different markets where we operate. So it's not the same what has happened in Spain or in Latin America, but mainly what I have to tell you is that during the first weeks of the lockdown, sales fell around 70%. So we were really, really worried. But very, very soon, we saw a recovery of the market. So in 2020, finally, the market in Spain was flat. And during 2021, we are seeing an increase of 14%. So it means that our market is increasing. Reading comforted us during lockdown. And when we've done some consumer insights, what we've seen, and when we ask people, they tell us that 37% of the population, they have increased their reading habits through the pandemic. And they are saying that when they are back to normal, they still will want to read. So this is really like a change in the consumer patterns. And we believe this is really interesting for our business. So we've even done a campaign that says books are good for you. So really through the pandemic, books have been like a very interesting way to entertain people, to learn, and to really think about other things. In the case of Latin America, the things have been a little bit different because the recovery has been very, very slow, and we haven't reached the pre-pandemic levels in that region yet. So we are still like trying to recover. Some bookshops have not been opening yet. And the thing there is that the online sales are very small, and this is one of the main reasons why the recovery is being so slow. But anyway, what we think is that publishing is the one of the sectors in the cultural industries that has emerged more clearly reinforced from the pandemic. And this is very good news for all of us. And when we look at the future of our industry and we see what has happened during the last month and we try to see what's going to come, I would like to say one thing. First of all, is that as Arnoldo Mondadori would say, he was a big entrepreneur, but the role of the editor is very, very important. So when we say that that maybe the editor, I know that people say sometimes, oh, what's the new role of the editor? I think it's the same role. So to be very close to the authors, to try to find new interesting stories for our readers. But maybe that the things that have changed is that now we are looking at an editor that is more focused on analytical data. So it means that still has to be creative and he has to have a good nose, of course, but at the same time, he has to combine this with analytical data. And what I see also is that more books are going to be commissioned instead of submission. So until now, the editor received the manuscript and he decided whether to publish or not. What I think is that in the future, he will be looking at new manuscripts in different ways, in different areas, like online, through new voices, and really it's a very interesting way of working. And in our case, the role of editor is also key because we are connected with Latin America, and the editor is the bridge between us. He's the one that tells also to our people in Latin America what could be published, what's interesting. And we are also trying to work not only through Spain and Latin America, but also in the different countries of Latin America, trying to build new voices, new big brands, and this is the task of the editors. Another trend that I see in the future is that, of course, there will be an evolution of formats. And we know that now digital sales in the case of the Spanish market are around 10% of the overall sales. Digital sales are increasing, we know, but what we've seen with the pandemic is that the paper format has been even reinforced. So paper has been really the winner of this pandemic, and this is also very important. Of course, there will be new formats like audiobooks, where we sell a lot in Mexico or in North America, but still we see that the favorite format will continue to be print, and this is really, really good for us. Another trend that, of course, everybody talks about it is the online sales. Online sales are increasing. This was a trend that we were seeing before the pandemic, but it's true that through the pandemic, it has accelerated. And right now, for example, in our markets, 30% of the overall sales are online. In the case of our worldwide publishing house, Penguin Random House, these figures are even higher. So we think that this will continue to grow. This means that a lot of backlist is sold through online, because online is really good at the things you already know. So it's very important for the bestsellers, for the best known content, but it's a challenge for the new content. So this is something that we have to take into account. So when operating in a market with very strong online sales, you also need to have very strong supply chain. So this is another trend that we see. The investment in supply chain has to be a must for all publishers. We think that it's very important to deliver the books on time and really have strong operations to forecast demand, to see the trends, how to manage the stock. So this is very, very important. And of course, linked to all this, it's the digitalization, technology, and data. So we need other people in the publishing houses to be able to analyze all this data and have the best use of it. And another trend that I want to tell is that I see the power of the bookstores. We think that bookstores are continue to be the main channel for discovery of new content. Recommendation is very, very, very important in the bookshops. So in the case of Penguin Random House Grupo Editorial, our main strategy is to reinforce this role of the bookshop. We are giving the bookshops all the aid, all the technology, all the things that we can give them to support them, and also to be as fast as Amazon is. And I think that they also have an opportunity in the online field. So at least in Spain and Latin America, we're seeing a lot of bookshops that are really doing a great job in distributing online. So we think that we need to reinforce this role of the bookstore, and also at the same time, they have to continue to be a cultural pole for authors, for recommendation, book clubs, and all these kind of things. Another trend that is changing very rapidly, and it has proved to be so during the pandemic, has been all the marketing and promotion. So during 2020, we've done 2,000 online events. And the good thing in our case that we operate in 9 different markets, and of course our books reach to different readers in different parts of the world, is that really the connection and the engagement with these online events has been huge. So we have had thousands of people connected to our events. This is something that we had never seen before, because we used to do offline promotion. And this is an opportunity for us, and I think for the industry in general. And in the case of the marketing, when coming more online, it's true that the marketing is also changing. So we need to be more data analytic in the terms of marketing, and really trying to convert this more into sales. So marketing can be more efficient. And I think it's now the time of new marketing and more converted into sales. And finally, I would like to add 2 more things. One is that I think we have a big opportunity right now with the European funds. The European funds are available for the different countries through the EU. And I think if we as publishers know how to use them, I think it can be like a really transformation of our industry. We can support bookshops, we can have more digitalization, we really can be at the same time more efficient. I think this can be very useful. And the last thing I would like to say when we look at the future is that we need an industry that is more sustainable. So in our role as publishers, and in the specific case of Penguin Random House Grupo Editorial, I want to say that we are really focused on this matter. 90% of our production right now is done local, so very close to our customers. The company has held the FSC environmental certification since 2014, but it's not only for the paper, but all the production chain. So really, we're being environmental, very sustainable when we produce our books. And we have two objectives for the next 2 years. One is the ink that we use. We're going to use 100% of our books are going to be produced with plant-based ink. And in the case of the plastic for the covers, will also be 100% sustainable. So this is our path. This is how I see the future. I'm really optimistic, really. I think the book industry will remain one of the main sources of learning and entertainment for the next generations, I'm sure. And of course, our main challenge is to find stories of interest to the different audiences where we target. So really, I think that Arnoldo Mondadori was a big entrepreneurship. I think he was very focused on the needs of the society at that time. And this is, I think it's our main goal as well, to be very close to our society, the needs to be diverse and really sustainable. So thank you very much.
Shalom, buongiorno. The topic of the conversation today was supposed to be the publishing of the future. And I found it a very witty choice because maybe it's easier to talk about the publishing of the future rather than the future of publishing, especially today. Dear friends, I think that we are here not only to remember Arnoldo Mondadori, but we also turn to him with a request. It's almost like to ask an advice from the old wise men of the tribe. We ask him to inspire us from his creative spirit, from his daring, from his wisdom, while we are facing the harsh challenges of the industry of books in our confused and confusing world. So I will not talk about the industry of books. I'll talk about the book, about the story, about the base to all this pyramid of the publishing world. I'll talk about the book and what it gives us, the readers, in the time of the mass media. That is the main element, the main source that provides us with the story of today, the story of these days. Mass media is a term that was coined by sociologists in the 30s of the previous century. I say mass media and I include in a very generalizing way all the vehicles of transmitting and broadcasting and social nets. All these are enormous dominant element in the shaping of the mind of each and every one of us, even if we refuse to admit it. Of course, there is a huge benefit and a huge importance to the mass media. It exposes lies, hypocrisy, hidden interests, exposes manipulations, but it is because of its power and enormous importance. It is essential to look at the mass media also with critical eye, because there is a very cunning deceit, even in the term mass media. We say mass media and we think immediately on the media that is meant for the masses. But actually, mass media is a media that has the power to turn human beings into masses, and sometimes, unfortunately, also into a mob. With its belligerence, its kitsch, its sentimentality, its inclination to stereotypes, and the way it inflames the primal and even the primitive anxieties we have, the primal urges, drives of mankind, the way we are tempted sometimes by xenophobia and hatred to everyone who is not us, who is different from us, from the majority, from the masses. As I said before, this aspect is only a part of the importance of the mass media, but it's a dominant part with interests that are both economic and political, and it has a huge role in the shaping of the mind and in creating a reality, creating certain values, and in creating a certain human climate. So what is the role of literature in a world that is shaped by this media? I'll say very few things that probably you know them not less than I know them, and maybe even more and better, but it's good, I think, to mention them, especially in this special occasion. So what can literature give its consumers, those who really need literature, and no other source will give them the things that literature does? If I had to choose some of the answers to this question, I would say literature gives us the sense of uniqueness of every human being, idiosyncrasy. And it gives us the feeling that each and every one of us is a whole world. And it gives us the feeling or the understanding that under every human story, there is another human story. And underneath that, another human story, more and more and more. This is the human archaeology. And literature, of course, sharpens our sensitivity, our awareness to the language that we use when we talk with others, with ourselves, the distinguished language, the personal, the private, maybe the most intimate signature that we can have. And literature, of course, is the urge to take a narrative, every narrative. It can be even the narrative of a couple who are quarreling with each other, or it can be the Israeli narrative versus the Palestinian narrative. And literature can take these narratives and show that almost every narrative is a human story that have congealed, that has fossilized. And we, the writers and the readers, we are giving this narrative a kind of a massage of the mind, softening it, melting it, until the narrative will go back to become a human story, a story of human beings. And literature, of course, means to insist on nuances, not to be tempted by generalizations or stereotypes or prejudices. The famous saying of Stalin comes to my mind. Actually, it comes to my mind every time I talk about literature. And he said, one death is a tragedy, million deaths is are statistics. So you see, in his, delicate and tender way, Mr. Stalin formulated for us the role of literature in our world that is so detached and cynical. And our role is to redeem the tragedy of the individual from these horrible statistics of Stalin. Like a dog, says Joseph K. in the last lines of The Trial, when he's being murdered. Like a dog, he thinks. But thanks to Kafka, Joseph K. had full life with all the layers of life, even when they were tough, and he had human face. And Hans Castorp in The Magic Mountain, he died in the end. But before that, he had full life and he fell in love, and everything was possible for him. And he also had a human face. So we can say that literature at its best is the only place where we can experience at the same time the lavishing wholeness of life, of vitality, together with the total horrifying emptiness and nothingness of death. There in this place, in this dimension, I think I could say, the books that have changed our life were written. The books that have raised us when we were children, the books that are respirating us now, the more we are maturing, aging, unfortunately. Dear friends, I publish my books with Mondadori Publishing House for 33 years. It's an ongoing dialogue and friendship with people that I have deep respect for their professionality, for their commitment to literature. In the eyes of the writer, there is a special importance to the editor who edits the book in translation, the book who has been translated. The editor has to maintain the special quality of the translation, so it will be the mix of the intimate with the exotic. Of course, it is the role of the translator, but the editor is the first reader of the translated book. He or she gets to their hand a primal creation, and he has to be the one who represents now the writer and the reader and the special unique melody of the translated book. And I remember conversations and arguments with the editors and the publishers of Mondadori, serious conversations over a word or a phrase, a huge effort in order to find the exact word. I remember the sharpness of these conversations and the pleasure that was in them, the pleasure of doing spiritual work and the pleasure of doing together something delicate and precise in a world that is so thick. 33 years I work with the people of Mondadori. Together we have given birth to many, many books for grown-ups and for children and for young adults, fiction books, documentary books. I think there is almost no one Italian city that I have not visited in the last 33 years, always accompanied by the team of Mondadori. For me, it's an opportunity to tell them thank you, toda in Hebrew, them and Arnoldo Mondadori, a man who not only entered an industry, but revitalized it, changed it, and in a sense, regenerated it anew according to his character and personality. Thank you very much. Toda and shalom.